The rain was coming down in sheets when the heavily fortified doors of the Russo estate echoed with a frantic, desperate knock. Dominic Russo, a ruthless boss who had traded his heart for a loaded gun years ago, opened it to find a soaking wet, plus-size widow holding the very secrets that could destroy his empire. She didn't come to beg. She came to make a deal. The storm outside mirrored the eternal winter inside Dominic Russo's chest. At 38, Dominic was the undisputed king of the Chicago underworld, a man whose name was whispered in boardroom meetings and back-alley dealings alike. He was a man carved from marble and violence, completely devoid of mercy, since the day an assassin's bomb took his wife, Sophia, 8 years ago. Since that day, Dominic had sworn off love. He believed in loyalty, in blood, in cold, hard cash. Affection was a liability he could no longer afford. It was 2:14 a.m. Dominic was in his mahogany-paneled study, a glass of amber bourbon in one hand, staring out at the torrential downpour battering the armored windows of his Lake Forest estate. Then came the knock. It wasn't a polite tap. It was a heavy, frantic pounding that bypassed the outer gates, a feat that should have been impossible. His head of security, Frankie, burst into the room, his hand hovering over his holster. "Boss, we have a situation at the front door. The outer gate perimeter was breached by a civilian vehicle. It's a woman." Dominic's brow furrowed. A woman bypassed $5 million of security. "She rammed her station wagon through the delivery gate," Frankie said, looking entirely bewildered. "She's unarmed, but she's refusing to leave. Says she has the Moretti files. She says her name is Harper Miller." Dominic's blood ran cold. The Moretti family was his greatest rival, a vicious syndicate led by Damian Moretti that had been creeping into Dominic's territory for months. "Bring her in," Dominic commanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Moments later, the heavy oak doors of his study were pushed open. Frankie practically shoved the woman inside. Dominic turned, expecting a hardened operative, a lethal assassin, or perhaps one of Damien's sleek, starving socialite mistresses. Instead, he found himself staring at Harper Miller. She was drenched, shivering violently, and undeniably fat. Water pooled around her sensible leather boots, dripping from a cheap trench coat that clung to her heavy frame. Harper was a big woman, with thick thighs, a generous belly, and a deeply soft, rounded face that was currently pale with a mixture of terror and fierce determination. Her dark hair was plastered to her cheeks, framing eyes the color of a turbulent ocean. In a world populated by surgically altered mob wives and rail-thin escorts, Harper stood out like a bruised peach in a bowl of plastic fruit. She was real. She was trembling, and she was completely out of her depth. "Mr. Russo," she said, her voice shaking, but her chin tipped upward. Dominic slowly set his bourbon glass on his desk. He closed the distance between them, his tall, imposing frame towering over her. He smelled of expensive cologne and gunpowder. She smelled of rain and cheap vanilla soap. "Harper Miller," Dominic purred, tasting the name. "You have a lot of nerve destroying my gate. Who are you, and why shouldn't I have Frankie put a bullet in your head right now?" Harper swallowed hard, her chest heaving. She reached a plump, trembling hand into the pocket of her soaked coat and pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger wrapped tightly in a plastic Ziploc bag. "My husband was Nathan Miller," she said, her voice cracking on his name. "He was an accountant. 3 days ago, the police told me he was killed in a mugging gone wrong. But Nathan wasn't mugged. He was tortured." Dominic's eyes flicked to the ledger. He knew of Nathan Miller. He was a quiet, low-level numbers guy who supposedly ran a legitimate tax firm downtown. Nathan worked for Damien Moretti, Harper continued, tears finally spilling over her lashes, mixing with the rainwater on her face. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know until yesterday, when I found a hidden safe under our floorboards. He was laundering Moretti's money, Mr. Russo, and he was skimming off the top to pay off his gambling debts. Dominic's eyes narrowed. And Moretti found out. Yes, she choked out. Moretti killed him. And now, Moretti's men are watching my house. They know Nathan hid the master ledger. They know I have it. I barely got out tonight. Dominic looked at this grieving, heavy-set widow. Society had likely taught her to shrink, to apologize for her size, to make herself invisible. Yet here she was, standing in the lion's den, holding raw meat. Why bring it to me? Dominic asked softly, stepping so close she had to crane her neck to look at him. Because you're the only monster in Chicago big enough to swallow Damien Moretti whole, Harper said, not backing down. I want to make a deal. Dominic let out a dark, breathless chuckle. You want to make a deal with the Mafia? I want protection, Harper stated, clutching the plastic-wrapped book to her chest. I want a safe place to sleep. And in exchange, I am giving you the exact locations, bank routing numbers, and dirty cop payrolls for Damien Moretti's entire organization. You get to destroy your enemy. I get to live. Dominic stared at her mouth, then up to her defiant eyes. He hadn't felt a spark of intrigue in nearly a decade. The sheer audacity of this soft, plus-size woman, someone who looked like she belonged baking cookies in a suburban kitchen, barging into his fortress to barter with blood money, was intoxicating. Frankie, Dominic said, never breaking eye contact with Harper. Yeah, boss? Tell Carmela to prepare the East Wing guest room and secure the perimeter. Mrs. Miller is staying with us. Harper exhaled a shaky breath, her knees buckling slightly. Dominic reached out instinctively, his large, calloused hands gripping her thick, soft upper arms to steady her. The contact sent an unexpected, violent jolt of electricity straight to his deadened heart. He felt the lush, undeniable softness of her body, completely foreign to his harsh world of sharp edges and steel. He pulled away quickly, his face an unreadable mask. Give me the ledger, Harper. Go upstairs. Lock your door. The Russo estate was a fortress disguised as a palace. Harper spent the next 48 hours sequestered in a sprawling bedroom that was larger than her entire suburban house. Carmela, Dominic's stern but motherly housekeeper, had brought her dry clothes. However, the designer wardrobe left behind by the estate's previous female occupants didn't fit Harper's body. Standing in front of the ornate gilded mirror, Harper felt a deep, familiar wave of shame wash over her. She was swimming in a pair of men's sweatpants, tightly cinched at her waist, and wearing one of Dominic's dark silk dress shirts. The fabric stretched taut across her large breasts and clung to the heavy curves of her hips and stomach. She looked absurd. She was fat, terrified, and a widow of a man she realized she never truly knew. Downstairs, Dominic was immersed in a war room scenario. The ledger Harper had provided was nothing short of a tactical nuclear weapon. It was all there. Moretti's shell companies, offshore accounts, and the names of every judge and politician in his pocket. But as Dominic sat at the head of his conference table, listening to his lieutenants plan the systematic dismantling of the Moretti empire, his mind kept wandering to the woman upstairs. He couldn't shake the memory of how she felt in his hands. He couldn't stop thinking about the defiant jut of her chin and the soft, fleshy curve of her throat. On the third night, Dominic couldn't stay away. He ordered Carmela to set dinner for two in the private dining room. When Harper was escorted down, she looked intensely uncomfortable. She tugged at the hem of Dominic's silk shirt, trying desperately to hide her stomach. Dominic stood up as she entered, a gesture of respect that made his guards exchange confused glances. "Sit," he commanded gently, pulling out a chair. The table was laden with rich, heavy Italian food, chicken parmigiana, fresh pasta, garlic bread, and robust red wine. Harper stared at the plates, her stomach growling loudly, betraying her. Her cheeks flushed crimson. I shouldn't," she murmured, looking down at her lap. "I'm not very hungry." Dominic sat across from her, his dark eyes piercing through her defenses. He knew exactly what she was doing. He had seen women starve themselves for a sliver of societal approval. "You're lying," Dominic said flatly. "You haven't touched the trays Carmela sent up in 2 days. Eat, Harper." "Mr. Russo, please." "Dom." "Call me Dom," he interrupted, pouring her a generous glass of wine. "And I don't tolerate starvation in my house. You took up space when you drove through my gates. Do not apologize for taking up space now." Harper looked up, her eyes wide with shock. Slowly, she picked up her fork. As she began to eat, Dominic watched her. There was a quiet, sensual grace to the way she moved. She didn't pick at her food like the women he was used to. She enjoyed it, even if she was plagued by an ingrained guilt. To Dominic, there was nothing more beautiful than a woman who was actually alive. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Harper whispered, wiping her mouth with a napkin. "Like I'm a target." Dominic leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. "I'm looking at you because you're the only real thing in this entire house. The only thing that isn't made of plastic or lies." The tension between them thickened, heavy and electric. But the fragile peace was shattered seconds later when the dining room doors flew open. Enzo, Dominic's lead tech analyst, burst in. He looked terrified. "Boss, I need to speak to you, now, alone." Dominic sighed, annoyed by the interruption. He stood and walked over to Enzo. "What is it?" "The ledger, boss," Enzo whispered urgently, though in the cavernous room, Harper could hear the frantic tone. There was a hidden encrypted partition on the flash drive tucked inside the binding. I finally cracked it. "Boss, Nathan Miller wasn't just working for Moretti." "Spit it out, Enzo." Enzo swallowed hard, glancing nervously at Harper, who had frozen in her seat. Nathan was a CI for the FBI. He was playing Moretti. But worse. "Boss, I ran his old aliases. 8 years ago, Nathan Miller was a freelance explosives expert. He built the rig." The temperature in the room dropped to absolute 0. Dominic's entire body went rigid. "What rig?" Dominic asked, his voice deadly quiet. "The car bomb, boss. The one that killed your wife." The silence that followed was deafening. Harper felt the blood drain from her face. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the look of pure, unadulterated murder that washed over Dominic Russo's face. Dominic turned slowly. The man who had looked at her with burning desire just moments ago was gone, replaced by the ruthless Mafia Boss who had bathed Chicago in blood. He crossed the room in 3 massive strides. Before Harper could scream, he grabbed her by the lapels of the silk shirt, hauling her out of her chair and slamming her back against the mahogany wall. "Dom!" she shrieked, her heavy body crashing against the wood. "Did you know?" he roared, his forearm pressing against her collarbone, his face inches from hers. His eyes were wound, black with agony and rage. "Did you know who your husband really was?" "No, I swear to God," Harper sobbed, terrified. She clawed at his arm, her soft, plump fingers failing to move his iron grip. "I didn't know. I thought he was an accountant. Dom, please, you're hurting me." Dominic pressed harder, the ghost of his dead wife screaming in his ears. For 8 years, he had hunted the man who built that bomb. And now, the widow of that very man was sleeping under his roof, eating his food, wearing his clothes. "He killed her," Dominic whispered, his voice cracking, a tear escaping his hardened eyes. "Your husband blew my wife to pieces." Harper sobbed openly, her heart shattering for the monster pinning her to the wall. She stopped fighting him. Instead, her soft, trembling hands reached up and cupped Dominic's face. It was an incredibly dangerous, foolish move. "I am so sorry," Harper wept, staring into his eyes. "If I had known, I would have killed him myself. I am so sorry, Dom." Dominic stared down at her. Her body was soft and yielding against his rigid frame. She was the enemy, by association. He should snap her neck. He should throw her to the wolves outside his gates. But as her thumb gently wiped the stray tear from his cheek, Dominic realized a horrifying truth. He didn't want to kill her. He wanted to protect her. And that realization terrified him more than any rival mafia boss ever could. Dominic released her, as if her soft flesh had suddenly turned to molten iron. He staggered backward, his chest heaving, his dark eyes locked on the weeping woman crumpled on his expensive hardwood floor. Harper remained there, pulling his oversized silk shirt tightly around her heavy, trembling body. She did not beg. She did not scream. She simply wept with a profound, shattering sorrow that cut through Dominic's rage like a scalpel. "Get her out of my sight," Dominic whispered, his voice completely hollowed out. "Lock her in the East Wing. If she tries to run, shoot her." Frankie stepped forward, his expression tight with sympathy, and gently helped the sobbing widow to her feet. Dominic turned his back to them, pouring himself another massive glass of bourbon. His hands, which had steadily held sniper rifles and executed traitors without a single tremor, were shaking violently. He had sworn to annihilate anyone connected to his wife's murder. Nathan Miller was the architect of his endless nightmare. Harper was Nathan's wife. The rules of his world dictated that she had to bleed for her husband's sins. But as Dominic stared at his own haggard reflection in the dark window pane, all he could feel was the phantom sensation of Harper's plush, comforting hands on his cheeks. He hated himself for the dark, twisted obsession taking root in his battered soul. He wanted her. He wanted to bury his face in her soft neck and forget the blood on his hands. Down in the basement server room, Enzo was typing furiously at his glowing monitors. Sweat beaded on his forehead, catching the blue light of the screens. He had played his hand perfectly. The encrypted partition story was a brilliant, desperate fabrication. The truth was far more dangerous. The physical leather ledger Harper had brought contained a handwritten list of Damian Moretti's paid informants, and sitting right at the top of page 42 was Enzo's name. Enzo had been selling Dominic's shipment routes to Moretti for 3 years. When Harper showed up with the book, Enzo knew he was a dead man walking. He had to make Dominic hate her. He had to make Dominic kill her before the boss bothered to read the physical pages. But Dominic had hesitated, and Enzo knew Dominic Russo rarely hesitated. Pulling a burner phone from his pocket, Enzo dialed a number he had memorized long ago. The line clicked open. The front gate protocols are disabled, Enzo whispered into the receiver, his voice trembling. The internal security cameras are looping a recording. Bring your men, Damien. If you want Russo, he's blind and bleeding right now. But you have to promise me safe passage out of Chicago. A cold, raspy laugh echoed through the earpiece. You have my word, Enzo. We are 3 minutes away. Upstairs, the storm continued to batter the sprawling estate. Dominic was pacing his study, unable to banish Harper's tear-stained face from his mind. He walked over to his desk and stared at the plastic-wrapped leather ledger. Enzo had claimed the truth was in the digital flash drive. But Dominic was an old-school mobster. He trusted ink and paper far more than he trusted pixels. With a heavy sigh, Dominic unwrapped the ledger. He flipped through the meticulously kept records of Nathan Miller. The man was a brilliant, meticulous coward. Dominic scanned the columns of laundered money, the real estate acquisitions, and the shell corporations. Then his thumb caught on page 42. Internal assets and payroll. Dominic's eyes scanned the list of dirty cops and paid politicians. Then he stopped. Enzo Rossi. Network infiltration. $50,000 monthly. The air vanished from Dominic's lungs. His blood instantly turned to glacial ice. Enzo, his most trusted tech advisor. A second, horrifying realization slammed into him with the force of a freight train. If Enzo was the mole, then the story about Nathan Miller building the bomb was a lie. Enzo had fabricated the connection to force Dominic into executing Harper. Harper was innocent. She was completely, utterly innocent. Before Dominic could reach for his radio to call Frankie, the deafening roar of automatic gunfire erupted from the front courtyard. The heavily reinforced glass of his study window shattered inward, raining crystalline shards across the mahogany floor. Moretti's men were inside the perimeter. Dominic drew his heavy, customized pistol, his instincts taking over. The internal alarms began to shriek, a piercing wail that echoed through the cavernous hallways. Gunfire rattled through the lower levels. The estate was under a massive, coordinated siege. "Frankie!" Dominic roared into his tactical radio. "Status!" Static hissed back at him, followed by Frankie's breathless voice. "Boss, we're completely overrun. They breached the south tunnels. It's Damien's hit squads. We have heavy casualties." "Where is Harper?" Dominic demanded, sprinting out of the study and into the dimly lit hallway, dropping 2 black-clad invaders with ruthless, pinpoint shots to the chest as he moved. "She's in the East Wing. Boss, Enzo let them in. I saw him running toward the garage." "Leave Enzo," Dominic barked, sliding behind a marble pillar as bullets chewed through the plaster above his head. "Fall back to the armory. I'm getting Harper." The East Wing was eerily quiet compared to the war zone erupting downstairs. Harper was huddled in the corner of her gilded prison, pressing her hands tightly over her ears to block out the terrifying sounds of men dying. She was sobbing, her large, soft body shaking uncontrollably. She had risked everything to escape the violence of Damien Moretti, only to bring the monster directly to the one place she thought was safe. Suddenly, the heavy oak door to her bedroom was kicked open. Harper screamed, squeezing her eyes shut, expecting the agonizing burn of a bullet. "Harper, get up!" She opened her eyes to see Dominic. His crisp white dress shirt was splattered with dark crimson blood, his eyes wild and predatory. He looked like the devil himself, but to Harper, he was an angel of salvation. He crossed the room and pulled her to her feet. She was heavy, practically dead weight in her terror, but Dominic hauled her up with effortless, desperate strength. "I'm sorry," he breathed, his free hand gripping the back of her thick neck, pulling her forehead against his chest for a fraction of a second. I was wrong. Enzo lied. You are innocent. Now run! He dragged her into the hallway, just as 3 of Moretti's heavily armed enforcers rounded the corner. Dominic shoved Harper behind him, using his own broad body as a human shield. He raised his weapon and fired 3 times in rapid succession. The men dropped, but one managed to squeeze off a wild burst of return fire. Dominic grunted violently as a bullet tore through his left shoulder, spinning him backward. He hit the floor hard, his weapon skittering across the polished wood out of reach. "Dom!" Harper shrieked, watching the blood instantly soak his shirt. From the shadows of the corridor, Damian Moretti stepped forward. He was a sleek, impeccably dressed man, with dead, shark-like eyes. He stepped over the bodies of his fallen men, holding a silenced pistol aimed directly at Dominic's head. "Russo," Damian purred, a wicked smile twisting his thin lips. "How the mighty have fallen, brought to your knees by a fat, weeping widow and a greedy computer geek." Dominic clutched his bleeding shoulder, his dark eyes blazing with unadulterated hatred. "You're a dead man, Damian. You just don't know it yet." "I think I'm very much alive," Damian chuckled, raising the gun. "And I think I'm going to kill you, take my ledger back, and then cut this bloated pig into little pieces." Harper's breath hitched. She had spent her entire life trying to be small. She had endured endless cruelties about her size, apologizing for the space she occupied. She had let her husband walk all over her, hiding his dark secrets while she baked and cleaned and tried to be a good, invisible wife. But as she looked at Damian Moretti, the man who had ruined her life, and then down at Dominic Russo, the ruthless killer who had looked at her with genuine, burning desire, something deep inside Harper finally snapped. She was tired of shrinking. She was a big, heavy woman, and it was time she used it. As Damian's finger tightened on the trigger, Harper let out a guttural, primal scream. With all her weight, she lunged forward. Damian, distracted by his own arrogance, didn't expect the terrified civilian to move. Harper slammed into him with the force of a runaway boulder. Her 250 pounds of solid, soft curves collided with the slender, tailored mob boss, knocking the wind completely out of his lungs. The impact sent Damian flying backward. His pistol discharged wildly, the bullet shattering a chandelier above them. Damian hit the floor hard, his skull cracking sickeningly against the marble base of a statue. Harper scrambled off him, panting heavily, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. Dominic didn't waste a millisecond. Ignoring the agonizing pain in his shoulder, he lunged forward, grabbed his fallen pistol, and fired twice into Damian Moretti's chest, ending the rival boss's reign of terror forever. Silence descended upon the bloody hallway, broken only by the distant wail of approaching police sirens. Frankie and the remaining loyal guards had successfully purged the rest of the attackers downstairs. The war was over. Dominic dropped his gun. He leaned heavily against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the floor, clutching his bleeding shoulder. He looked up at Harper. She stood there, trembling, her chest heaving under the blood-spattered silk shirt, her wild, dark hair framing her flushed, beautiful face. She had just assaulted a ruthless mafia don, using nothing but her own body weight. She was magnificent. "Come here," Dominic rasped, holding out his good arm. Harper fell to her knees beside him, her soft, plump hands hovering nervously over his bleeding wound. "Dom, you're shot. We need to stop the bleeding. You need a hospital." "I need you." Dominic corrected, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He reached up and grabbed the lapels of the shirt she wore, pulling her heavy, gorgeous body flush against his chest. He didn't care about the pain. He didn't care about the sirens. He crashed his lips onto hers. The kiss was fierce, demanding, and tasted of copper, sweat, and salvation. Harper gasped against his mouth, her arms instinctively wrapping around his broad shoulders. For the first time in her life, a man wasn't holding her like a secret or a burden. Dominic held her like she was the most precious, vital thing in the universe. He possessed her curves, his large hand sliding down to grip the thick, plush swell of her hip, anchoring her to him. When he finally broke the kiss, they were both breathless. "You saved my life, Harper," Dominic whispered, pressing his forehead against hers. "My brave, beautiful girl." Tears pricked Harper's eyes, but this time they were tears of absolute relief. "You're going to survive this, Dom. And then we are going to burn that ledger together." "We're going to burn a lot of things," Dominic promised, a dark, protective fire burning in his eyes. He knew his world would never be the same. The cold, empty king of Chicago had been overthrown by a plus-size widow in sensible boots. She had knocked on his door at midnight, and in doing so, she had blown the hinges off his hardened, deadened heart. Frankie rounded the corner, flanked by two bruised but heavily armed guards. He took one look at Damian Moretti's corpse, and then at his boss, who was currently wrapping his good arm protectively around the thick waist of Harper Miller. "Boss," Frankie said, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Police are 2 miles out. The cleanup crew is on standby. What's the play?" Dominic didn't look at Frankie. His eyes remained locked on Harper, tracing the soft, flushed line of her jaw. "The play," Dominic said smoothly, "is that Damian Moretti suffered a fatal accident on my property, and then you are going to call my private physician. After that, you're going to hire the best tailors in Chicago. The future queen of this family needs a new wardrobe, one that actually fits." Harper let out a wet, breathless laugh, burying her face in the crook of his neck. Dominic closed his eyes, inhaling the scent of vanilla and rain. For the first time in 8 long, bloody years, Dominic Russo wasn't surrounded by ghosts. He was holding on to something profoundly, incredibly real. And he was never, ever letting her go. Did this thrilling tale of midnight bargains, mafia wars, and unexpected love keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved watching Harper prove that true strength comes in all shapes and sizes, and Dominic finding his heart again, smash that like button. Share this story with your friends who crave intense romance and shocking twists. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more steamy, action-packed audio dramas and dramatic storytelling videos.